Thanks, Vincent, for asking me again to participate in the research methodology course. So we're talking here about research funding. Why is this important? Well, as a general rule, we can't do research if we don't have funding. So perhaps we should have started with this. But I think Vincent had it right by putting it at the end, because really the priority in research is to get excited about the questions, excited about the opportunities to investigate in research before thinking about how to pay for it. But I thought we should start again with why we do research. Here are some great quotes from two famous people. Research is creating new knowledge. And it really is. In medicine, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We think we have to learn a lot through medical school and our postgraduate exams, but every single one of those disease and management facts that we've learnt is almost certainly built on someone else's research. And Bill Gates, now the second wealthiest man in the world, said, "I believe in innovation, and the way you get innovation is you fund research and you learn the basic facts." Microsoft software must be some of the most applied products in the world, but they stemmed from their founders' belief in building up from first principles. Learn the basic facts. This is what research is all about. So, as a general rule, funding for research falls into two camps: project funding and personal funding. Funding varies by the type of project, from those organisations with more of a focus on basic science to clinical, and with industry input as well. Personal fellowships can be categorised by career stage into clinical research fellowships for PhD research, intermediate or clinician scientist fellowships, which span the period from the end of training to early consultant years. I have one of these now. Vincent had one in the past. And senior fellowships for established chairs. I'm not aware of any urologists currently in the UK that have one of these. Of course, writing grants is challenging. It requires concentration and effort. It's time-consuming, but it's an inevitable part of academic life. We can't do research without funding. And we must remember that it's through putting our ideas down on paper that we are forced into clear and succinct thinking. And it's through the process of writing grants that we can turn a brilliant idea into evidence that will change the future of medicine. But if all that sounds a bit much like hard work, then let's just spend a moment remembering why we do research. Why not just be a jobbing clinician and let someone else do the hard work? Well, often research comes at us by chance, a conversation with someone interesting. It has to be said that research often offsets the frustrations of NHS clinical work. I'm a massive fan of the NHS, but if we're ever feeling straitjacketed into doing things in a particular way, or we're not being listened to, then research is just so different. The freedom not to have to deliver 12 clinical sessions a week, the freedom to think, to ask questions, to work in teams where everyone is striving to the same goal. And to be frank, few of us are going to become world leaders technically in our chosen subspecialty. But through research, whether basic or clinical, you really can become an expert, whether it's the particular gene you're working on in the lab or the clinical trial evidence that you've delivered to the field. I've mentioned about asking questions, seeking answers, and I've talked about freedom and indeed flexibility with time. There's a reason why so many surgical trainees have their kids doing research. I've mentioned teamwork and collaborations, and let's face it, we all want something substantial to talk about at meetings when we finally get back to them. Something that enables us to scratch below the surface in conversations over coffee breaks and to forge lasting collaborations. That's one of the bits I really love. I've mentioned that funding is part of the academic life. Just today, I had 2 hour-long Zoom meetings talking about grant application, one that's in the early planning stages, one that's all but been awarded. Applying for grants, being rejected, applying again, and sometimes getting them is just part of what we do. Well, I wondered how best to illustrate this, and perhaps you might indulge me with a quick look back at my own career so far to illustrate this. So this is the training pathway. I'm now here, but what's happened along the way? Well, just before I became a reg, I applied to the then Prostate UK, which became Prostate Action and is now part of Prostate Cancer UK, for a small grant, which wonderfully I got. And that whetted my appetite. Next was my clinical research fellowship to NIHR and GlaxoSmithKline, which I also got. Then my first fail, a clinical lecturer starter grant from the Academy of Medical Sciences, but I reworked the application and got it 6 months later. At the same time, I started applying to Prostate Cancer UK for a grant to do some work with patient-derived xenografts, and I got that. Then my first really big application came to CR UK for a clinician scientist fellowship, for which I flew all the way back from Australia. I didn't get it, but I did get it the following year, having just started as a consultant. And since then, here are some of the grants I've been a co-applicant on, or lead applicant with my colleagues in Oxford. More than half of these we haven't got. This is how it works. Apologies if there's any overlap with earlier parts of the programme. I saw John McGrath featured earlier in the bill. But it's worth remembering that research, and therefore funding, can be pitched anywhere throughout the patient pathway. It needn't involve a laboratory, nor necessarily a trial. Here's surgery, low down in the middle. But remember everything else, from aspects of prevention in primary care, to accuracy of cytology and early detection, through to attitudes to survivorship and end-of-life care, with a raft of improvement tools here, like a stick of rock woven right through all this. But if we do focus on what we perhaps think of more conventionally as research, laboratory research and clinical trials, phased trials, then remember the loop of translational research from bench to bedside and back. There are so many places for us to set our stall. Now, if I make the assumption that most people watching this who are really thinking about the need for funding are probably considering whether or not to do a PhD, then this seems a good place to start. It's important to choose the right funder for the right proposal. We need to look at the strategic aims of the grant awarding body or charity and key our research proposal into these aims. What type of research? How long? And here are some examples for PhD fellowship funding. It shows here how long for and how much they award and what they tend to fund. This all comes from Adam Nelson's nice paper in the Journal of Clinical Urology. Some organisations fund a whole PhD project and are very competitive, against which applicants will need to apply from around the country and from many specialties. And this includes awarding bodies such as the MRC, Wellcome Trust and Cancer Research UK. Others are more specialty focused and provide funding for a year or so to set people up for a national award. And for those seeking funding later on or for more clinical projects, then the NIHR is the go-to place with a broad spectrum of opportunities for funding, as you can see here. But I think John may have already mentioned this, so I'll move on. To point out that the NIHR has more than £500 million, that's over £500 million, although still less than 1% of the NHS budget, to spend on research. Writing the proposal, well, we need to follow the instructions, write in clear, simple, non-verbose English and stick closely to the word count. And any application centres on 3 key aspects: person, place and project, with slightly different emphases depending on whether it's a personal fellowship or a project application. The person leading the application needs to show that they've been top-notch at whatever they've done and to be clear on why this, now. And the place for the research needs to be convincing. Is there a track record of output? Or if a new entrant to the field, then are there strong collaborators acting as guarantors? But really the key thing is the project itself. And this is all about the scientific method. It's interesting how often people think this is more complex than it really is. It's really very simple. It starts with an idea. Human beings are naturally inquisitive, coming up with questions about what we see, read or hear. And this needs to be formatted into a question. Questions involve careful observation where we apply rigorous skepticism about what we observe. Take Newton. Do big apples fall at the same speed as small ones? And if not, why not? Then there is the really important hypothesis, which is really just turning the question into a falsifiable statement. Big apples fall faster than small apples. And then the null hypothesis, no, they don't. Then we outline our objectives. The best hypotheses naturally lead to a set of predictions that can be tested in various ways. And finally, we construct our experiments to meet the objectives. This is where we describe what we're actually going to do. Carefully controlled experiments. So a couple of final things. It takes time to put a grant application together. I'm not sure it always takes 10 months to write an application, like Adam says here, but it may do from the first idea, I guess. But we're all slightly different on this. Perhaps like me, you need the pressure of an imminent deadline to work efficiently. But remember, a good application will have been read by lots of trusted advisors and mentors before final submission and interview. And that means we need to leave time. Here's an example of the CRUK Electronic Grants Management System, EGMS. Most grant awarding bodies use something similar to this. This is my CSF award here. They tend to list the awards available for which you're eligible to apply. You click the box and away you go. And a final word on the surgical trials units. Did you know they existed? They were set up by the Royal College of Surgeons in collaboration with various active surgical research hubs around the country with a view to facilitating surgical trials. We have one in Oxford. There are 6 altogether. I really recommend going to speak to one of these if you have a good idea for surgical research, especially if you're in one of these cities. So, in summary, it all starts with a good idea, then a question or hypothesis, and then talking to people and getting feedback. Build a team, enjoy it, this is where it gets fun. Identify possible funders and contact a trials unit if available and appropriate to the project. Do the due diligence on timing and requirements, and then put in some desk work. My senior colleague and boss, Freddie Hamdy, clears the diary and holds up at home for 2 or 3 days when he has the groundwork to do on a new grant application. You must create space to think, he tells me, and it's great advice. And then seek internal review, feedback from trusted colleagues and internal advisors. Then more time at the desk, and then submit. And then it's time to start planning the next grant. So here are some resources that you may want to look up if needed. Vincent, thanks very much. Over to you.